Why does a man who once shared every dream with you now offer only silence when you ask about his day? It's not because the love is gone. It's because for him, the silence has become a shield, his only defense. To understand his retreat, we must return to the beginning, when their world was built entirely on shared words and laughter. In the early days of their marriage, their small stone cottage echoed with the sound of hope and collaborative dreams. He would return from the quarry, his hands and tunic covered in fine white dust, but his eyes would be bright. He would share the day's struggles, a stubborn piece of rock, a difficult negotiation for a new commission for the church. She, in turn, would show him the progress in her small herb garden, her fingers tracing the leaves of a new sprout. Their conversations were the mortar holding their life together, each story a stone laid carefully in place, building their future. His work was a source of shared pride. He wasn't just cutting stone, he was building a legacy for them. She supported his ambition, believing in the strength of his hands and the vision he held for a better life. But the seasons turned, and years of hard labor began to etch new lines onto his face and into their life. The work grew heavier, the patrons more demanding, the winters colder. The vibrant colors of their early days began to fade. The easy laughter that once filled their home grew infrequent, replaced by the weary silence of two people simply enduring. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the nature of their words began to shift. Support curdled into critique. A question about his day was no longer an invitation to share, but a prelude to a complaint about their finances. "Did the merchant pay you?" she might ask, her tone edged with the anxiety of their ever-present scarcity. His explanations about the difficulty of his work, once heard with empathy, were now met with sighs of impatience. Her suggestions on how he should manage his craft felt less like help and more like a vote of no confidence. "That carving is too ornate," she'd say. "The baker won't pay extra for such flourishes. We need practical work." Each comment, born of her own fear and anxiety, landed on him like a small, sharp blow, a chipping away of his pride. He tried, at first, to defend his choices, to explain the craftsman's process, the reason for the delay, the hope for a better client. But every explanation seemed to lead to another argument, another misunderstanding, another opportunity to disappoint her. The emotional cost of these conversations became too high. The risk of saying the wrong thing was a constant, heavy burden. So, he began to speak less. It was not a conscious decision, but a gradual, protective retreat into himself. Simple answers replaced detailed stories. A nod replaced a sentence. Eventually, silence replaced the nod. He stopped sharing the small victories from his day, because he feared they would be measured and found wanting. He stopped sharing his worries because he feared they would be seen as weakness, another sign of his failure to provide. This withdrawal was not a weapon intended to hurt her. It was a shield, forged in the fires of constant emotional taxation. For him, every potential conversation became a trial. He would weigh each word, anticipating the sting of critique before it was even spoken. This constant state of alert is exhausting. It is an invisible labor, a tax on his soul that slowly left him bankrupt. A man's sense of self is often deeply entwined with his ability to provide and protect. It is his core identity. When that identity is constantly questioned, it doesn't just feel like criticism of his work. It feels like a critique of his soul. Respect is the air a marriage breathes. When it becomes polluted with doubt and disappointment, love begins to suffocate. He started to see himself through her eyes, not as a craftsman, but as a collection of failures and shortcomings. This perceived loss of respect was a wound far deeper than any financial struggle. It was a silent, internal bleeding. And so, the great silence deepened. It was no longer an absence of words, but a powerful, suffocating presence in their home. They moved around each other with the careful choreography of strangers, their paths rarely crossing in their tiny home. From her perspective, his silence was a mystery, a cold wall. She could not comprehend. She saw it as indifference. She remembered the boy who shared every thought. Now, she saw a man who wouldn't even share his gaze. In her loneliness, she began to push harder, desperate for any reaction, any sign of the man he used to be. "Don't you care?" Her eyes would plead, even when her voice was silent. Don't you see what is happening to us? But her pleas for connection were heard by him as accusations. Each question felt like another blow from the hammer. So he retreated further, reinforcing the very wall she was trying to break down. A tragic, self-perpetuating cycle. He found his only solace in the solitary nature of his work. The stone did not judge him. It did not criticize. It simply was. It was honest. It yielded only to skill and patience, two things he still felt he possessed. His workshop became his sanctuary. The dust in the air, a veil. The rhythmic tapping of his tools, a mantra. Meanwhile, the connection between them continued to fray, like an old rope stretched to its breaking point. Small rituals of affection vanished. A shared cup of ale, a hand on the shoulder, all became memories of a distant past. The warmth in their cottage seemed to recede, clinging only to the fire, leaving the corners in a permanent, cold shadow. One day, a commission for the village church, a source of immense pride, was rejected. The stone had an unforeseen flaw. It was a simple matter of bad luck, a hidden fracture in the rock. But for Aemon, it was a public declaration of his failure. He returned home that evening, cloaked in a shame so heavy it was almost a physical presence. He needed comfort. He needed the empathy he once knew from her, but he no longer knew how to ask for it. The path was overgrown. Alara saw his dark mood immediately, but she saw it through the lens of her own long-nurtured frustration. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice weary, already expecting the worst, already assigning blame. Her question was the final blow. The one moment he might have reached out, the door was slammed shut in his face. He said nothing. He walked past her into the house, picked up a piece of bread, and began to eat in silence. For her, it was the ultimate rejection. His silence, a confirmation that he no longer cared enough to even speak. For him, it was survival, the only way to endure a pain too deep for words, a wound that she had just salted. And so the wall between them was complete, built not of stone, but of misunderstood silences and unspoken pain. This is the heart of the tragedy. He doesn't stop talking because he has nothing to say. He stops talking because he believes he has nothing to say that she will truly want to hear. He stops talking because the effort to be heard, to be understood without judgment, has become too great a burden. The silence is not empty. It is filled with the ghosts of 1,000 arguments he chose not to have. It is heavy with the weight of compliments he no longer feels worthy to receive, and therefore cannot give. His silence is a fortress. It protects what little remains of his self-worth from what feels like a constant siege. But a fortress designed to protect a man from the world also becomes his prison, isolating him completely. She sees a man who doesn't care. He feels like a soldier in a battle he can never win, choosing a tactical retreat. He is not withdrawing from her, specifically. He is withdrawing from the pain he has come to associate with their interactions. This emotional disconnect is the slow, quiet death of a marriage. It rarely happens with a bang, but with a long, drawn-out sigh. So how is such a chasm bridged? How can a fortress be dismantled when its prisoner has forgotten he holds the key? It cannot be done with force. Pounding on the gates with more questions and demands only strengthens the walls. The answer does not lie in assigning blame, for both are victims of this tragic cycle. Both are hurting. The beginning of healing lies in a simple, profound shift of perspective. From accusation to observation. It begins when she stops seeing his silence as a weapon and starts seeing it as a wound. One evening, she observes him when he thinks he is alone, tending to a small, wilting plant in their neglected garden. She sees a tenderness there she has not seen in years, a quiet act of nurturing in the face of decay. In that moment, she doesn't see the man who won't talk to her. She sees a man trying desperately to keep something alive. Later, she does not ask him about his day. She does not bring up their lack of coin. Instead, she places a cup of warm broth before him, a simple offering, with no strings attached, no expectation. He looks at the cup, then at her, searching for the familiar trap, the inevitable critique that follows any kindness. But he finds none. Her expression is not demanding. It is quiet, perhaps even kind. He does not speak, but he gives a small, almost imperceptible nod. It is the first stone removed from the wall. This is not a magical cure. The years of silence cannot be erased in a single moment. The damage is deep, but it is a beginning. It is the creation of a tiny, safe space, free from the threat of judgment. Rebuilding connection requires this foundation of safety. It requires her to create an environment where his words won't be used against him. And it requires him to take the terrifying risk of speaking again, of offering a piece of himself, however small. Perhaps one day, he returns from his work, and she simply says, "You look tired," without any follow-up demand. And in that moment of pure empathy, he might find the strength to respond, "I am." The stone was stubborn today. A tiny conversation, seemingly insignificant, but it is the first trickle of water through a dam that has held for years. Men often process emotions internally. They seek solutions, not just sympathy. Their silence can be a sign of deep thought. To rebuild, a partner must learn to respect that silence, to see it not as an absence, but as a space. She can offer an invitation into conversation, but cannot force entry. "I am here, if you wish to talk." For him, learning to reconnect means understanding that her questions often come from a place of fear, not malice. Her anxiety about their survival is not an attack on his competence, but a cry for reassurance. He must learn to hear the question beneath the question. Not, "Why aren't you doing more?" but, "Are we going to be all right?" It is a slow, difficult dance, a journey of 1,000 small, courageous steps taken by two people. It's the choice to offer a moment of grace instead of a familiar criticism. It's the choice to risk a moment of vulnerability instead of retreating into a familiar silence. A man's emotional retreat in a marriage is rarely a sign that love has died. More often, it is a sign that the connection has become painful, and he is trying to protect both himself and the relationship from more damage. He withdraws, not to abandon the structure, but because he fears his every move will bring another stone crashing down. The silence is a desperate attempt to stop the shaking, to find stable ground in a world that feels emotionally treacherous. Understanding this is the first step. It shifts the dynamic from a battle to be won, to a problem to be solved together. It replaces the anger of, "Why won't you talk to me?" with the empathy of, "What has made it so hard for you to speak?" It requires patience. It requires the rebuilding of trust, stone by painstaking stone. It requires creating a new language, where a quiet moment of shared presence can be as meaningful as 1,000 words. A hand offered in silence, a shared look of understanding across a quiet room. These become the new mortar, binding them together, not with the grand pronouncements of youth, but with the weathered wisdom of survival. The man who fell silent did so to protect the last embers of love from a wind that threatened to extinguish them. The goal is not to force him out of his fortress, but to make the world outside its walls feel safe enough to walk in again. To rebuild a space where words are not weapons, but tools. Not for critique, but for connection. So that when she asks about his day, he can finally, safely, tell her the truth, knowing he will be heard.